The evening had settled quietly over the house, wrapping it in a stillness that felt heavier than usual. Laura sat alone in the living room, her body slightly leaned into the corner of the couch. Her fingers loosely wrapped around a mug of tea that had long gone cold. The soft lamp beside her cast a warm glow, but it didn't reach the corners of the room, where shadows stretched and lingered like unspoken thoughts. It had been 2 years since her husband Daniel passed away. 2 years since laughter filled the house without effort. 2 years since she felt like she belonged somewhere without trying so hard. Time had moved forward just as everyone said it would, but for Laura, it felt like something inside her had stayed behind, frozen in a moment she couldn't fully let go of. She had learned how to function again. She went to work, smiled when needed, cooked meals, and kept the house in order. To anyone looking from the outside, she was doing fine, strong even. But strength, she had come to realize, was often just a quiet way of hiding how much something still hurt. That evening was one of the harder ones. It started small, like it always did. A memory slipping in without warning. A song she hadn't meant to think about. The way Daniel used to sit exactly where she was sitting now, joking about something random. Filling the silence with warmth, Laura pressed her lips together, trying to push the thought away, but it only grew stronger. Her chest tightened, and before she could stop it, her eyes filled with tears. She let out a slow breath, shaking her head slightly as if that would help her regain control. "No more," she whispered under her breath. "You're okay." But she wasn't. The house felt too quiet. To empty Dot, she placed the mug on the table and leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. Her hands came up to her face, covering it as she tried to steady her breathing. The tears slipped through anyway, silent but steady. Carrying the weight of everything she had kept inside for too long, she hated moments like this. Not because she was crying, but because she felt weak, like she was failing to move on, failing to become the version of herself everyone expected her to be. After a minute, she wiped her face quickly, almost angrily, as if she could erase the emotion just as easily. She sat back, straightening her posture, trying to pull herself together. That's when she heard it. A soft creak from the hallway. Her body froze instantly. Her heart skipped, then started beating faster. She hadn't expected anyone home yet. Ethan had told her he would be out late. She was sure of it. Slowly, she turned her head toward the sound, and there he was. Ethan stood near the hallway entrance, his hands still resting lightly against the wall, as if he had just stopped himself from walking further. His expression was calm, but there was something in his eyes, a quiet concern, mixed with hesitation. For a brief moment, time seemed to stop. Laura felt a sudden wave of embarrassment rush over her. She hadn't wanted anyone to see her like this, especially not him. I didn't mean to interrupt," Ethan said, his voice low and careful, like he was stepping into something fragile. Laura quickly looked away, brushing a hand over her face again, hoping to hide any sign of what had just happened. "You didn't," she replied, her voice softer than usual. "I was just tired." Even as she said it, she knew it sounded unconvincing. Ethan didn't move right away. He stayed where he was, watching her for a second, not in a way that felt uncomfortable, but in a way that showed he wasn't sure what the right thing to do was. Then he took a few slow steps forward. "You've been crying," he said gently. It wasn't a question. It was simple, direct, and honest. Laura let out a quiet breath, her shoulders dropping slightly. There was no point denying it. "Not now, it's nothing," she said, though her voice cracked just enough to betray her. "Just one of those days." Nodded slightly, as if he understood more than she expected him to. He stopped a few feet away, giving her space, not pushing too close. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy, but in a different way. Like both of them were trying to figure out what came next. Ethan had grown up in that house. He had seen Laura in many roles, kind, patient, steady, always holding things together even when life got difficult. She had been there for him in ways that went beyond obligation, offering support, guidance, and quiet care without ever asking for anything in return. Seeing her like this, so vulnerable, emotional, unguarded, felt different. It made something shift inside him. "I know I'm not him," Ethan said after a moment, his tone careful but sincere. "And I never will be." Laura looked up at him, surprised by the direction of his words. He continued, choosing each word with thought. "But you don't have to go through this alone." The sentence hung in the air between them. Laura's expression softened slightly, her eyes searching his face as if trying to understand what he meant beyond the words themselves. "You shouldn't have to carry my sadness." "Ethan," she said quietly. He shook his head almost immediately. "It's not about carrying it," he replied. "It's about being here." There was something in the way he said, "It's simple, steady," without hesitation that made it hard for her to respond right away. For a long time, Laura had felt like she was standing on her own, holding everything together by herself. Even when people offered help, it often felt distant, temporary, or forced. This didn't feel like that. This felt real. She looked at him more closely now, noticing details she hadn't paid attention to before. The way he stood, calm but grounded. The way his voice carried quiet confidence. The way he didn't try to fix everything, but simply stayed present for the first time in a long while. She didn't just see the boy she had helped raise. She saw a young man. And that realization brought a mix of emotions she hadn't expected. Gratitude, comfort, and something else she couldn't quite name. It made her uneasy, not because anything was wrong, but because she wasn't sure what it meant. "I'm okay," she said finally, though her voice was softer now. Less defensive, Ethan gave a small nod, but he didn't fully agree. "You don't have to pretend," he said gently. Laura let out a faint, almost tired smile. "I'm not pretending. I'm just trying." He understood that trying was something he knew well. He moved a little closer, but still kept a respectful distance, then sat down on the edge of the chair across from her. The space between them felt intentional, not too close, not too far. "Some days are harder than others," he said. "That doesn't mean you're not moving forward." Laura looked down at her hands, considering his words. They were simple, but they carried a kind of truth she hadn't allowed herself to fully accept. "Sometimes it feels like I'm standing still," she admitted. Ethan leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees. "Maybe you are," he said, "but that doesn't mean you'll stay there." She glanced up at him again. There was no pressure in his tone, no expectation, just quiet belief. And for some reason that affected her more than anything else. The room felt different now, warmer, less empty. The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was calm, not comfortable. Laura leaned back slightly, letting out a slow breath. The tightness in her chest had eased, even if only a little. "Thank you," she said softly. Ethan gave a small shrug. "You don't have to thank me." But she knew. She did BIT because, in that moment, he hadn't tried to fix her pain or rush her out of it. He had simply stayed, and that had made all the difference. As the evening continued, they talked a little more. Nothing too deep, nothing overwhelming. Just small things enough to keep the silence from returning to what it had been before. But underneath it all, something had shifted. It wasn't obvious. It wasn't spoken, but it was there. A new awareness, a new kind of connection. And as Laura sat there, listening to him speak, couldn't ignore the feeling growing quietly inside her. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel completely alone. And that realization, as comforting as it was, also left her with a question. She wasn't ready to answer, because deep down she couldn't help but wonder. The days after that quiet evening passed differently than usual. The house seemed warmer, not because of the weather or the sun shining through the windows, but because of the subtle shift in the way Laura and Ethan interacted. There was an unspoken understanding between them now, one that didn't need words. Small gestures, lingering glances, and moments of shared silence carried a weight they both felt but didn't fully name. Laura noticed it first in the way Ethan paused before leaving the room, as if checking one last time that she was okay. It wasn't intrusive. It was careful, respectful, and somehow comforting. She had grown used to being alone in her sadness, to hiding it behind polite smiles and busy schedules. But Ethan's presence reminded her that she didn't have to be alone anymore. Ethan, on his side, was learning something new too. He had always seen Laura as a strong figure, someone who had guided him, protected him, and helped him through life's challenges. But now, seeing her vulnerable, seeing the quiet ache she carried beneath her composed exterior, stirred something deeper. It wasn't just empathy. It was admiration mixed with an unexpected closeness. He found himself seeking opportunities to be near her, not in a forced way, but as naturally as breathing. Simple conversations at the kitchen table turned into moments of reflection. He began asking questions about her day, about what she was thinking, about the small joys she still found in life. He wasn't intrusive. He was present. And that presence mattered more than either of them could admit. One afternoon, Laura found herself sitting at the dining table with a cup of coffee, staring out the window at the slowly turning leaves in the backyard. Ethan was there, casually leaning against the counter, watching her quietly. They hadn't spoken much, yet the silence was comfortable. Finally, Ethan broke it, his voice calm, almost tentative. "You know, I've been thinking about how much you've done for me, for all of us," he said. Laura turned her head slightly, meeting his eyes. His expression was earnest, filled with a quiet intensity that made her heart skip. She smiled faintly, unsure how to respond. Words felt heavy, but she spoke anyway. "That's what family does," she said softly. But even as she said it, she felt a strange tension. Family, it was supposed to feel safe and predictable. Yet with him now, the word carried new dimensions she hadn't anticipated. Ethan's gaze didn't waver. "You deserve happiness," he said, "not just being strong all the time." His tone was gentle, not commanding or judgmental, just observing the truth he saw in her. Laura looked down at her coffee cup, fingers tracing the rim. The words hit her unexpectedly. She hadn't thought about happiness in a long time, truly, not in a way that included herself as the one deserving it. "Sometimes I don't even know what that looks like anymore," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The admission hung in the air, heavy with vulnerability, yet also strangely freeing. It was the first time she had let herself speak that truth aloud. Ethan moved a little closer, careful not to cross any line that might make her uncomfortable. "Maybe it starts with not being alone," he suggested. The simplicity of it, the honesty struck her. For years, she had carried her burdens quietly, isolating herself emotionally. She had convinced herself that independence meant surviving alone. But now she realized survival didn't have to mean loneliness. His words weren't dramatic. They didn't need to be. Their weight came from the genuine understanding behind them. Laura felt warmth spread through her chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced fully in years. Days turned into evenings, and evenings into quiet nights. Their interactions became richer, filled with subtle emotional exchanges. Ethan would offer to help with chores, not out of obligation, but because he genuinely wanted to support her. He would leave little notes or messages to check on her, small reminders that someone cared deeply. Laura, in turn, started opening up more, sharing memories she had tucked away, speaking about moments with Daniel, about the struggles of living without him, and even about small hopes for the future. Every story, every shared emotion drew them closer, but in a safe, respectful way. One night, Laura sat on the couch reading a book she barely followed. Ethan entered the room holding a cup of tea. He sat beside her, careful to leave space. yet close enough that she felt his presence as a comforting anchor. "I thought you might like some tea," he said softly. She looked up, surprised by the thoughtfulness, and smiled faintly. "Thank you," she replied. It was more than just tea. It was acknowledgement, care, attention. They sat together in silence, letting the quiet fill the room, letting the connection grow without words. The growing closeness didn't escape Laura's notice. She knew she had to maintain boundaries to honor the roles they had in each other's lives. But she also realized that the emotional intimacy they shared didn't have to be dangerous or wrong. It could be pure, human, and deeply healing. She started to recognize that love didn't always mean romantic or physical affection. Sometimes, love was patient, understanding, and present. And in Ethan, she found a kind of love she hadn't expected to find again. Safe, kind, and unwavering. Ethan, on his part, struggled with his feelings too. There were moments when he wanted to say more, to express the emotions that churned inside him, but he held back. He understood that some lines were not to be crossed, that their relationship needed careful handling. He focused instead on being there in meaningful ways, listening, supporting, laughing with her, and quietly ensuring that she never felt alone again. Each day, he learned more about patience, about empathy, and about the power of simply being present. One evening, Laura reflected on the changes in herself. She felt lighter, more open, less burdened by the constant weight of loss. The presence of someone who truly cared made the loneliness bearable, the grief softer, and the future slightly more hopeful. She realized that emotional support could be transformative, that sharing her vulnerability didn't make her weak, but instead allowed her to heal. And it was Ethan who had brought that realization into her life, not through grand gestures, but through quiet understanding, steady patience, and unspoken respect. Their relationship evolved into a delicate balance of closeness and boundaries. They could share deep emotions without discomfort, laugh at small things without awkwardness, can support each other without losing sight of the family structure that bound them together. Laura began to trust again, not fully, but enough to allow warmth and companionship to enter her life. She noticed herself smiling more, enjoying simple moments, and feeling a spark of hope she hadn't felt in years. Ethan noticed it too. He felt satisfaction in seeing her smile, joy in hearing her laugh, and a deep sense of purpose in being someone she could rely on. The emotional bond between them grew stronger, not because of dramatic declarations or impulsive decisions, but because it was built on mutual respect, care, and understanding. It was a love of a different kind, one that was platonic but deeply meaningful, one that healed old wounds and offered the promise of better days. They shared quiet evenings, long conversations, and small acts of kindness. Every interaction reinforced the unspoken truth that they mattered to each other, not as forbidden affection, but as two people who had found comfort, support, and emotional connection in each other. Laura felt gratitude every day, realizing that even after loss, life could offer unexpected relationships that provided warmth, understanding, and companionship. Ethan felt the same, understanding that his role wasn't about replacing the past, but about helping her embrace the present and look forward to the future. The house, once heavy with silence and grief, now felt alive with subtle energy. Emotional intimacy had replaced loneliness, compassion had replaced distance, and respect had replaced uncertainty. Laura and Ethan had discovered that meaningful connection could exist without boundaries being crossed. That love could be expressed in safe, nurturing ways. And that healing often comes from being fully seen and understood by someone who cares. By the end of that chapter in their lives, they had formed a bond that was enduring and profoundly human. It was a relationship built not on impulse or forbidden desire, but on trust, empathy, and emotional honesty. It reminded Laura that happiness wasn't a distant, unreachable goal. It was found in small moments, in shared understanding. and in the quiet reassurance that someone was there when life felt heavy. And for Ethan, it reinforced that love and care could be expressed in ways that were protective, respectful, and deeply meaningful, creating a connection that neither of them had anticipated but both cherished deeply. They had learned to navigate the complexity of emotions, the weight of grief, and the depth of human connection, discovering that sometimes the strongest bonds are forged not in passion, but in quiet support, patience, and unwavering presence. And as they continued through their days together, the house felt warmer, life felt lighter, and both of them knew that their relationship bound by respect, care, and understanding was something rare and beautiful, a testament to the power of emotional closeness and the human capacity to heal together.